Hello and welcome to EDHREC's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average deck list as compiled by the data on EDHREC and make some quick swaps to it to help take it from a good start to a great one. There's a brand new Kamigawa set on the horizon with a bunch of new incoming ninjas, which means it's time to evaluate how some of those new ninjas will fit into currently existing ninjutsu decks. That's right, this is a Yuriko the Tiger Shadow Upping the Average Redux. Yuriko the Tiger Shadow is the third most popular commander in the whole format right now. Touting over 7,000 decks to her name, her commander ninjutsu ability is devastatingly good at sneaking her into play on the cheap, and the combat damage trigger fills the hand while melting enemy life totals. With the release of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, she has a bunch of new ninjas to choose from, so let's upgrade her current average deck list. Remember that any swaps we make to the average deck must either keep the total price of the deck cost neutral or else help lower the overall price of the deck. Yuriko is a powerful, popular, and potent commander. She appeals to a whole bunch of audiences. She even makes waves in the competitive sphere of the format too. But what have we got going on here in the average deck? Well, as you can see, it's pretty spicy stuff. With that said, there are two main things that I would like to try and address with this deck. First, we'll upgrade this deck in its current state, deciding which new ninjas are worth adding into this deck. And second, we'll focus on finding budget alternatives for a lot of the cards in this deck, because its current price is pretty high. Let's briefly familiarize ourselves with Yuriko's core cards. We start not with ninjas, but with the unblockable creatures that help us cheat them into play. These creatures are the lifeblood of the deck, because we'll struggle to get good ninjas onto the battlefield without them. And there are some great ninjas too. Heck, with enough ninjas in the format now, we can afford to be super choosy about which ones we want to play. In fact, this deck has so many options now that it is kinda heartbreaking that we can't play all of those awesome ninjas. But the ones we've got here are spicy. Look how cool these effects are. Also, some very early EDHREC data has shown us that Kato and Satoru Umezawa are already showing up in Yuriko's data, but we're still in early stages to see any other data for other ninjas just yet, hence this video's mission to evaluate those new ones. But let us quickly continue. This deck's tricks are also very deadly. Arcane Adaptation turns even our 1/1 unblockable creatures into amazing ninjas for Yuriko to proc tons of triggers. Grazilax and Cunning Evasion are surprise all-stars, forcing opponents to either let our ninjas through, or else just put them right back into hand and then replace them with our unblocked creatures anyway. Don't forget too that you can activate ninjutsu abilities after combat damage has been dealt in the end of combat step. A more detailed explanation can be found in the previous Yuriko Upping the Average video. And finally, Yuriko also enjoys a smattering of top deck manipulation cards, which help her set up the top of her library with a massive card that will chunk enemy life totals after her ninjas have dealt damage. Alright, we've got our bearings, but now let's upgrade. Like I said before, we've got two sections, modern ninjas and budget ninjas. Let's kick it off with part 1. New cards are so exciting. You see a whole bunch of bright, shiny new toys and you want to get them all and try them out. And then it hits you, that horrible, horrible question of the deck brewing process. What do we actually cut to make room for all of these? We already saw Kaito and Satoru make it into the deck, but I'm going to jump straight to the other new ninjas that I think this deck needs to play right away. Thousand Face Shadow is breathtakingly good. Super exciting card. We can't not play this. Silver Fur Master is also a total cert. What an amazing ninja lord. And Nashi? Sweet, sweet Nashi. That is some very tricky card advantage. I am all about it. These cards immediately stole my heart. However, they aren't the only ones. Moon Circuit Hacker really impresses me. That's such a nifty effect. And hi, Prosperous Thief, get in here, please. That is awesome. This deck would love the Quick Treasure mana boost. And boy, did I want to keep adding more ninjas here, but heck, we just added 5 cards, y'all. And to add, we must cut. So naturally, I then looked to the creatures to decide what we would remove in exchange for those creatures we just added, and the answer is none of them. I don't want to cut any of these. Which means, because we have to cut something. So let's focus on the non-creature spells then. I think Whisper Silk Cloak and Aqueous Form are pretty easy cuts. Aqueous Form isn't persistent enough, what with all of our bounce trickery, and Whisper Silk is far too expensive for a deck this slim and this fast. After that, Otherworldly Gaze kinda catches my eye. Although I appreciate setting up the top of the deck, I find it kind of unnecessary. Maybe if our deck had more graveyard synergy, perhaps I'd be more into this one. Then there are two sorceries that I've loved a little bit less and less for Yuriko over time. Karn's Temporal Sundering and Devastation Tide are super cool, but kind of swingy. They have fail states, or at least require more setup than basically most of the rest of our deck. So over time, they lost their luster a little bit for me. But that is tough. Tuning up a deck that is already this tuned feels really hard. Those were not easy cuts. So I hope this next swap is at least super fun and a little bit more smooth. I'd like to take just a regular swamp and instead exchange it for a Blinkmoth Nexus. If we're short on evasive creatures, I just really like the potential for our land to help us sneak our ninjas right into play. Alright, the last swap in this section, again, won't be easy either, and I think that some folks will in fact elect to ignore this recommendation, which is totally understandable, but I've just never been a fan of scheming symmetry. I totally appreciate its purpose here. Set up the top of a deck with a bonkers big spell and use Yuriko to devastate enemy life totals. I just also find that the opponent you choose will find a card specifically meant to destroy you, and that this card doesn't even allow for much political favor either because of how threatening Yuriko always appears. This could be a meta call. This is just my experience, and like I said, this deck is so tuned up that the cuts here are not easy to make. But the reason I think it's important to make one more cut here is because there's one other card I have to get in. A card that I've been regretting not adding to the deck the first time I talked about Yuriko like 2 years ago. So for context, in the average list, we see the card Familiar's Ruse. I think for the uninitiated, this will look like a bad card. It's a counterspell, but with a restriction. It looks awful, right? But it's secretly a total MVP. Once a ninja is in play, it can sometimes be a little tough to find a way for that ninja to sneak through enemy lines again. One of the cheapest ways to sneak them through unblocked one more time would be to get them back into our hand, and then use one of our 1-mana 1/1 unblockable creatures to reactivate the ninjutsu ability. Ninjas just hate to remain on the battlefield, where they're exposed and susceptible. They love sneaking off the battlefield whenever possible. Familiar's Ruse isn't just a counterspell, it's a Yuriko ninjutsu enabler. So, to join it, I highly recommend Abjure for your Yuriko lists. It counters a spell, but you have to sacrifice a blue creature, which is no problem at all. Yuriko will just go back to the command zone, ready to Commander Ninjutsu herself right back into play for 2 mana. And boom, we're done with part 1. Even though there are some other new ninjas I am interested in trying, the deck list currently in front of us here is so tight that I don't think I can justify cutting another card. You can find this version of the deck in the description below, but now it's time for the tougher part. Now it's time to talk budget. We don't need to be fancy here. The strikes will be deadly no matter how much they cost. Let's say we cut this deck's price down by $550. So the average cost of this deck is pretty spicy, but Yuriko is the number 3 most popular commander for a reason. She's powerful no matter how gilded up or souped up her kit happens to be. And like, some of these prices are just silly. Sakashima Student is $80? I can't with that. It's ludicrous. Let's draw the line at no card above $10. That means we're gonna end up changing out like 20 cards, which is as far as I dare go before I feel I'm deviating too far from the quote average deck list, but which will also cut this deck's price by more than 2/3. So yeah, bam! Now let's get some replacements in here. First, we lost 4 expensive lands, so let me throw in 3 more basics to start, to help rebalance some things out. I'll also add in one more fun utility land here too though, and that's Fairy Conclave. It enters tapped, which is admittedly a tough thing on this deck's tempo, but it's still a potential evasive threat for whenever we desperately need to ninjutsu another friend back into play. Next, we lost a small number of pricey ninjas, but I'm going to opt to include a lot more creatures to replace them. Biting Palm Ninja, Moonsnare Specialist, and Dokuchi Silencer were all cards I really wanted to add in part 1, but I couldn't justify cutting anything else to get them in there. Without the weight of all of those $50 cards though, there's no reason not to slam these right into the deck. There are lots of fun tricks to pull with these, totally love them. But like I said, I'm not just adding in a couple of replacements, I'm adding in a lot more creatures. Gadul Lurker, Wingcrafter, and Siren Stormtamer all impress me a lot, either by being unblockable, giving another ninja evasion, or protecting the things that matter most to us, and they all do it for just 1 mana, which is a huge premium. And after them, I really like Thalico Seer and Phantom Ninja. It's just kinda nifty to have a naturally unblockable ninja that Yuriko doesn't have to worry about being tricksy with. And as for the Thalakos Seer, the shadow means it will basically never be blocked, and it even nets us card advantage whenever we activate a ninjutsu ability and send it back to our hand. This card's really cool, highly recommend. This does increase the creature count in our deck to be pretty high, but I have a good reason for doing this. You know how we have 2 arcane adaptation effects in the deck already? I'm going to recommend adding in another 2 to join them: Xenograph and Conspiracy. Admittedly, Conspiracy isn't a super budget card hanging around like $4 or so right now, but when the entire deck's budget has shifted so seismically, I think it is a worthwhile card to prioritize. We just added in a ton more unblockable 1/1s, and more creature type shifting and more consistency with that effect will turn all of those 1/1s into absolute powerhouses with Yuriko. I think these are especially useful replacements for those $30 and $50 tutors and top deck setup cards. Rather than carefully setting up the top of our library with a high mana card, we can instead turn all of our 1/1s into ninjas, attack with like 5 of them, and deal a ton of damage with 5 Yuriko triggers. Instead of accuracy by precision, it'll be accuracy by volume, and that will be a ton of fun. And our last important note is that we lost some expensive removal spells in the budget shuffle, including a few with high mana costs that our commander liked to rip off the top of the deck. Thus, I'm going to propose some personal favorites here. Evacuation is great for ninjas. Bounce to hand? Sweet, that's exactly where they want to be. And although it isn't an instant, Coastal Breach is a high mana card that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of mana to actually cast. Go with whatever board wipes and removal spells that you personally feel most comfortable with, though. After those, I also dig split cards with Yuriko's ability, since they combine their mana costs for her Life Loss trigger. So Consign to Oblivion and Discovery Dispersal, scooch on in here. They're weird effects that our opponents won't usually see coming, and when Yuriko flips them, they'll do an admirable chunk of damage too. However, here is my last and favorite card to add to Yuriko decks: Trickery Charm. What a thing of beauty. It can change a creature's type to ninja, or it can give a ninja evasion, or it can set up the top of our deck to make sure that Yuriko flips a huge mana cost for her Life Loss trigger. I love this card so much, it is perfectly tricky. And that'll do it for us. Here we have a new Yuriko list with much less intimidating price tag. You can find a link to both Yuriko deck lists in the description below with the cuts and the maybe board. I hope you've enjoyed this quick Yuriko Redux, and I'd really love to know, what are your favorite new ninjas? What cards would you recommend putting into a more modern Yuriko list? If you've got recommendations for your fellow Yuriko players, make sure you leave them down in the comments below. And as always, thanks so much for watching.